I'm Justin Mott and welcome to my home in Hanoi, Vietnam, and today I'm going to talk about how to improve your portraits, specifically how to improve your natural light portraits. So if you're here because you want to learn better portraits in the studio and with artificial lighting, this is not for you. This is how to improve your portraits using natural light. So stay tuned for these tips. Okay, let's start with understanding light. Of course, yes, you need to understand how to let more light into your camera or how to let less light into your camera, things like that. The technical aspects of photography, you need to understand that before you listen to me here. That's important. There are plenty of tips online. There are plenty of YouTube channels dedicated to that. But once you understand light, once you understand natural light, then you need to figure out how you want to use it. And again, I'm not going to tell you exactly how to use it because every one of us is different. If you follow any sort of formula in photography, if I say capture light in this way, capture light, you're just going to shoot like me, and that's not the goal here. The goal is for you to understand light and then to make that your canvas, and then to create your pictures, your portraits using light the way you want to capture it, to define your style as a photographer. The first thing I like to teach people in photography is to find light. Look for light in different ways. Right now you can see this would be considered flat light in my apartment right now. There's no natural light coming in. It's quite cloudy, it's quite overcast outside. It's very soft light, but it is very kind of boring in my opinion. So this is not the kind of light that I would like to shoot a portrait in. Later on in the day, if the sun does come out and the clouds aren't there, or the pollution's not there, the light will create these great shadows here in my apartment because the light comes through these beams here and creates this interesting mood. So I always like that first hour of the day and the last hour of the day. I like to do my portraits, my environmental portraits, my natural light portraits within natural light. So my process is I'm looking for the right time of day to capture that light. The sun is my natural light source. The sun is your natural light source. So where is the sun going to be for your portrait? Where can you put your subject within that light? And where does the light hit your background? Where does the light hit your subject? Where does the light hit your foreground? All those things need to be calculated in. So the first thing that I like to do, it's like, that's my blank canvas. Where is my light? Where do I want to put my subject in that light? What kind of light, what kind of mood am I creating with that light? What am I trying to say with that light? Light will create a mood for your picture. So if it's this, harsh shadows coming through and bright light coming through, what am I trying to say? Is it something moody? If I'm trying to capture something very happy and very pleasant, I've got this really moody light coming across, does that match? So think about these things. Understand light, understand the kind of light you like, but also understand the kind of light you want to use to convey the message you want to say in your portrait specifically. What is the message you're trying to say? What is the mood you're trying to convey with that light? So that's the first thing I think about. So first thing, understand light technically, yes, do that. The second thing, once you understand how to capture light in the way you want to capture it, how to capture natural light in the way you want to capture it, then figure out what time of day, where is that light to capture the mood that you want to get for your portrait, for your subject. Okay, the next thing, yes, composition. Everyone talks about composition, the rule of thirds and all those things. I think if you're following those sort of rules, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're learning, again, how to follow someone else's photography, how to create generic photos. Yeah, probably better than most people, but are you that different? Is it that unique? So with composition, you need to think about how can you vary your composition. So many times when I see people start with their portrait photography, they've got that long lens, right? You've got the 7200 and then you framed your subject like a headshot here. So you've got that compressed background, they pop out. Sure, that's a start. That's a nice way to start, but those are really just generic headshots, right? When you've got that long lens, that compressed shot, and you're just photographing someone's head, 9 times out of 10, in my opinion, that's not going to be a great shot. It's like someone's LinkedIn profile picture or just like any generic profile picture. So how can you enhance your composition? How can you make it more interesting? How can you make it more creative? You can try different lenses. I like to use a 35mm, but I'm always thinking. Every time I'm doing a portrait, I'm thinking about my subject. I'm thinking about the message I'm trying to convey. I'm thinking about how this is all going to come together. So if you're going to use a really wide-angle lens, it's going to cause some distortion and you're getting really close. It's not a definite no. You can do that. You can get close to people. Some some photographers make a career out of that, getting really close wide shots. But think about what you're trying to say with that distortion. Are you trying to say something funny? Are you trying to show them, larger than life and you're going low? So your composition, again, will feed into this final portrait that you're doing. What kind of message, just like the light, what message are you trying to convey? What are you trying to show with your lens choice? What are you trying to show with the distance between your subject? Vary that distance, try different things between you and your subject, and think about why you're changing lens and why you're changing distance. Always be thinking. So the third tip I'm going to give you is to use your environment to tell the story about your subject. Again, if you're limiting to this shot right here, you've got no background, you've got no context. And again, I'm not saying that doesn't always work. I'm not saying it can't work. It can, but I like to use my environment to tell a story. I like to use my environment to tell a story about the subject, the message I'm trying to convey. If you're doing a professional job, if you're doing a commission job, you probably don't get to pick your subject. Most of the time, no, or all the time, no. You don't really get to pick who you're photographing. Sure, if you're doing a travel story, you can kind of pick the right person that fits the story. But if you're commissioned to do a portrait for a corporate job or an editorial job, they've picked the subject. You need to try to create a background that tells a story about that subject. How do you do that? Well, you look around. When I'm photographing someone, I like to go to their house. I like to go to their office. I want to see where they work. I want to see what's around them. I want to see how I can bring what's around into context of the story that I'm trying to say. Now, if you're shooting non-professionally and just want to take portraits of friends, again, think of the same thing though. You get to pick. You even have more leisure here. You can pick the background that you want. So if I'm photographing a bike mechanic in Hanoi, I love to show the background of where he or she works. I want to see like the bikes in the background. I want to see the garage or something like that. I had an assignment in Hanoi photographing a famous historian. So I'd like to go to his house. I wanted to go to his house and see where he works. And he had this great piles of books everywhere. And he lived in this old sort of French house and these great staircases with this light coming through. So all these things are factoring. I want to get some of the shots of him with his books and him in his office. It was kind of a mess and all these, periodicals, all these books everywhere. And that was interesting to me. Like I might not have thought of that unless I went to his house to see. So I'm looking around, I'm trying to create a story with my background. Now, sometimes you don't need all that context, sometimes you do. So when you don't, then I'm looking for colors. I'm looking for interesting backgrounds and layers with texture. So I'm looking for a background that has good colors that complement the person. I'm looking for a background that has a nice light. Or it might just be something even more generic. I'm looking for a background that brings you to a certain city. So I'm trying to bring the viewer to Hanoi, or I'm trying to bring a viewer to Bangkok, or wherever I'm on assignment, so that it shows something about where you are. It really depends on the assignment. It depends on what you're trying to capture. Or it depends if you're just doing this for fun. It just depends what you want to show. But using your background, thinking about your background can bring the story, can bring your portrait to life, and can bring context to the story you're trying to convey with your portrait. So the next tip I'm going to give you is to create layers with your portrait. I mean, a lot of times, again, if you're just doing that square shot here, you're just doing that rectangle shot here, kind of boring, right? Some people pull it off very well. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying it's been done over and over again. If you want to make it more interesting, try with layers. Now, everyone thinks about the subject and their background. Now, that's important. You can use your foreground to tell a story. You can shoot through things. I'm always looking around to try to create layers with my shots. I'm looking for things to shoot through. Now, the first level of this would be to just shoot through anything that creates interesting textures. Now, a next level would be shooting through something that also provides a story. So I'll just stay with my example of the historian, right? So if maybe I had a pile of books and I shot through the books and had him just small in the frame, or they were filling my foreground. Now, a lot of people I see make this mistake, and I used to do it a lot too, is when you're shooting wide open, you're shooting at f.1.4 or f2.8, and you've got that foreground sort of blurry and out of the frame, sometimes that can become a big blob. So you need to factor in, when you're using that foreground, when you're shooting through something, like I like to do a lot in my photography, is it too much of a blob? My former editor at the New York Times used to tell me, like, Justin, you're using 1.4 too much, and your foreground is becoming a blob. It's not creating any context, and that was a mistake, because I always liked the pop that I got at 1.4 on my subject. But once I learned that, I started to shoot maybe a little bit like f.56 when I needed that foreground to show a little bit. So I shot my subject, and the books were in the foreground, and it was at 1.4. You might not read. Funny, no pun intended, but you might not understand that those are books. But if I dialed it up and shot at f5.6 and you saw the bindings, you saw the pages, you get a little bit of that. Your eye still goes to the subject, then it works a lot better, right? So think about not just what your foreground is. Again, sometimes it works just with some texture. I hold leaves, I hold flowers sometimes. I'm shooting commercial work, just something to create letters. Or I use it sometimes to hide something I don't want to have, but that's more when I'm shooting like something editorial and I can't move around. I'm just having to shoot in the fly. A portrait, you are setting everything up. You have picked everything, so it should be perfect. I'll get to that later. But using that foreground is so important. Use that foreground, one, to create texture, to create layers, but also using that foreground to tell the story, just like you're doing with your background, right? So think about what to shoot through. If there's something around, you could bring something, or just looking around at your subject. Or again, if you're just shooting for fun, if you're just trying to improve your portfolio, just, bring something. Have some thought about what can I put in the foreground that brings context. One of our studio photographers was photographing a guitarist in her studio, and he was doing a lot of the same portraits. They were working out well, but I was kind of overseeing the shoot, and I said, what if you brought the guitars in the front of the shot and you shot through that? That created some context and, just the curves of the guitars. And you're shooting it not at 1.4. It was too much of a blob in the frame and too distracting. But, shooting at f5, 6, or even f11, you get those guitars in the foreground, but they're not too in focus. Your attention goes right to your subject because you're shooting a portrait of this person, not the guitar. So just using that foreground to tell a story, using that foreground just like use the background to create context, to create a story, and to create layers. Okay, the fifth tip I'm going to give you to improve your portrait photography, this applies to not just natural light, this applies to all portrait photography, but this is the one that I see people make the biggest mistake on. This is the one that takes a little time as a photographer as you grow. It's coaching and teaching and having a vision for the person's expression and their posture. The first thing you're going to do is, okay, you're going to photograph someone. You might be thinking about all these things technically with your camera. Where's the light coming from? Where's the background? What's my foreground? What are my layers? All these different things, but all that could be perfect. If they have a horrible expression or horrible posture, your photograph will be ruined. All these things need to work together for a portrait to come together perfectly. Without one of these things, it's like a chain. It all kind of falls apart. But posture and expression is so important. So often you're going to tell people, okay, smile. Maybe you want them to smile and look at the camera. Okay, that's your generic go-to. A lot of people, when you ask them to smile, it looks kind of stupid, right? If you ask me to smile, you go, it's awkward. So what I try to do is I go in with a vision already. I try to think about, like everything I've said before, like the light, like the layers, like the foreground, like the background. Have an idea before you do your photograph. Even if you're doing it on the spot, just try to think quickly, what is the expression that you want from them? If you want something completely natural in who they are, go for that. If you want something a little more serious, make sure you go for that. Make sure you coach that. In the end, it's your responsibility to coach this out of them. As a photographer, yes, you're working together with your subject, but they don't see what you're seeing, right? You're looking through the camera. If they look awkward, you need to tell them. If their posture is slouchy and that's not what you want, coach it out of them. Take time. Don't just give up. It can be hard. Everyone is a little bit different. Some people require more coaching. Think about ahead of time. If you're doing it professionally and you're on an editorial shoot, yes, you have to think about ethically, like what's the expression, what's the look you're trying to go for, and make sure you communicate that with them. That's only fair to your subject and fair to your audience and fair to your publication. But if you're shooting something for fun or you're just practicing, just try different expressions, try different postures. People always think, what do I do with my hands? If you don't coach them, a lot of people will be uncomfortable. Their hands will be stiff like this, they'll be looking like this. So try different things. Try looking away from the camera, try looking at the camera, try the posture looking this way. You could try looking that way. Try different things with the hands, have them sit at a desk, try different things. Make sure their expression is matching everything else you're trying to convey in this portrait. Again, the mood you're creating with the light, the layers that you're creating, all these different things need to come together. So those are just 5 tips to improve your portrait photography. There's a lot of other things out there, but those are some of the basics that I think that you can do to improve your portrait photography. Just to recap again, play around with light, understand light, make sure you're using light to create your canvas, to create your mood. Play around with your composition, the distance that you are from your subject, the distance, the amount of background that you're showing. Are you showing something really close? Are you showing a detail? If so, why? If you're showing more background, why? Is all that necessary? Weigh all those things in. Use your environment to tell a story. What are you showing? Are you trying to show a sense of place? Are you trying to show where they work? Are you trying to show where this person lives? Things like that. Create layers. Use that foreground. Use that background. Use those things to tell a story. And lastly, don't forget the expressions. Make sure their expression and the posture matches the look and matches the mood that you're trying to convey. And I'll just end with this. I had a professor at San Francisco State University, and one thing that he said that stayed with me for 20 years now, 20 years later, he went on to be an editor at the Chronicle, and he was a San Francisco Chronicle. He was also an editor at Wired magazine. And he said this when we were doing portraits. We were doing a portrait assignment for him. One thing he said to me was very important, and it just always stayed with me throughout my entire career. Portrait photography, like anything else, you're doing journalism, documentary, you can't control all these things. Portrait photography, you control. If you're doing it personally, you've picked your subject, so make sure they're interesting, right? If you're doing it on an assignment, sure, you don't pick your subject, but you pick everything else. Think about it in your head ahead of time. Plan it the best you can. I know some circumstances you can't plan it that much. You have to show up and shoot, but when you can plan it, everything should be perfect. Thank you for bearing with me and introduce my new dog, Choo Choo. He's somewhere around here. Still Pon-Pon's around here as well. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and excited to start this new year. I've got a lot of content ideas, a lot of tips for you guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and thank you guys. Have a great day. Bye.